everyone, Carl here. Hope you're all doing great. Today I will go over how I built this ruined dwarven monument thing. I think it's a great piece of fantasy scatter terrain that would work well in Warhammer, D&D and maybe Frostgrave with some modifications. It's probably not a great fit for Mordheim proper, but could find a place on a border town burning table. Best of all, it's a deceptively simple build, so let's get going. I started off with a round piece of fiberboard and glued it to a piece of XPS foam. Then I trimmed off the foam using the board as a guide. It would have been smarter to use something that does not absorb water instead of the board, but it somehow survived anyway. After cutting the excess, I sanded down the sides with a 400 grit sandpaper and made sure the piece still fit in my 10 by 10 cm base allowance, but more on that later. Next, I started to hack up the XPS to give it some shape. You can cut yours up any way you like, just make sure you leave enough surface area to bulk up. At this point, I also found a place to put this dwarf head and cut out a nook for it. I'm not going to go over how I made the head because I literally just followed the instructions on Net1 videos, and anything I add will just make them less clear. Instead, I'm linking the video here, so go watch that and tell Mike I said hi. I managed to carve this in about 15 minutes on my first try, but remember, our work doesn't have to be as neat as his, because this is a ruin. With the head in place, I started to glue lumps of XPS foam wherever I thought they made sense. This is a great way to use up offcuts. I shaped some of them beforehand, but mostly I just glued them up as they were. Once I had enough bulk on the structure, I started shaping it by cutting away corners, beveling edges and so on. You can also cut across multiple lumps to create a larger surface. Don't worry about gaps just yet, we'll get to those in a bit. At this point I was more or less satisfied with the shape, so I started to rough it up by cutting some V-shapes into the foam to create some vertical grooves. I made a mistake here and made most of them too shallow, so they got filled in later. Don't be afraid to cut deep here. Okay, the next steps have to be done in one go, so make sure you have a little time to spare. I took some stucco and spread it on the piece like it's the world's ugliest cake. This unified the piece and filled in any gaps. Obviously, avoid the face. You could also use plaster, but be aware it might give you less working time. I immediately worked over the whole piece with a wet brush to smooth it out. Wet the brush regularly. You don't need it to be mirror smooth, but flatten out any weird bumps. Next, while everything was still wet, I started sprinkling sawdust and sand over the areas I wanted to be earth or grass. Try to be a bit precise as this stuff will stick to the wet filler wherever it hits it. After I gave the filler time to set, I sprayed the ground cover with a mix of 50-50 surgical spirit and water, and dripped on a lot of watered down PVA glue to seal it, then left this to set. It's a good idea to cover your work surface before you do this, by the way. With the ground cover sealed, I sealed the face with a mix of Mod Podge and black paint. You can also use PVA glue and paint here. The paint just helps me see areas I haven't sealed yet. While the mix was still wet, I lightly sprinkled on some sand to give it a bit more texture. At this point I also glued in some stones here and there. Next I sprayed the piece grey and gave it a white zenithal highlight. I also gave it a light coat of gloss varnish on top to protect the prime from the load of water I was going to dump on it. Okay, the really fun part is coming up, so maybe now is a good time to remind you to like, subscribe, share and do all the YouTube stuff. On to painting. I saw this technique on Luke APS's channel a few weeks back, and it's really efficient. It also scales up real well if you're doing a batch of pieces. I start off by painting the ground cover with a very watery mix of raw umber and burnt sienna. You can see the paint is very thin and we're not looking for an even coverage here, just get plenty on it. Next, I watered the mix down even more and splashed some over the rocky bits. Then did the same with yellow ochre. Again, we're not looking for full coverage here. I even mixed some reds and blues in smaller areas, but they didn't show as much. Right now, you might be asking yourself, Carl, what the hell, this is a clown, not a rock face. But as you will see in a few seconds, this dries out really pale and kind of subtle. At this point, I took some Payne's Grey, also very watered down, and buffed it on as per Luke's instructions. While the paint was still wet, I took a paper towel and dabbed at the high areas. Dabbed, not wiped, that's important. I should also point out that I skipped one of the steps in Luke's tutorial, where he paints regular grey before paints. Thing is, he does that to kill very stark white highlights, but he's painting over white and I'm painting over grey, so I don't need that as much. To round off the paintwork, I dry brushed the earth areas with yellow ochre and protected the paint with another coat of varnish. We're almost there. I started to apply PVA glue to areas where I wanted grass and sprinkled flock over it. It's best to do this small areas at a time, but you don't need to be very precise with sprinkling as the flock will only stick to the glue. Once the glue had set, I turned the piece upside down over a container and bet the devil out of it to remove the loose flock, then set about sealing it. This is the exact same process I used to do the ground cover earlier. After sealing, I also dusted on a small amount of fresh flock to make it fluffier. I also added in a few grass tufts. You can glue these on after the flock dries, but I find they bond better this way. In any case, all that's left is to leave this to dry and hit it with another coat of varnish to keep it safe. And that's it for this build. I had originally planned to use this as a base for this month's Encounter 10x10 competition, hence the size restriction, and meant to add a goblin tower on top of it. Unfortunately, my schedule got a little cramped and I don't think I can give that build the attention it deserves within the time frame. Besides, I have to admit that I really like how this turned out and I want to keep it as a piece of scatter terrain all on its own. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, join me next week. I will be painting up the Halloween sculpt. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you again for watching and have a great week.